Something is unsettling about the last days of summer. The air cools down just enough that you notice it at night, and the days feel shorter, like the world itself is telling you the fun is over. Back in 2015, I was 17, and 3 of my closest friends decided we wanted one last trip together before school started again. We were all going into senior year, and we knew that the next summer would be different. College plans, jobs, and life would pull us apart, so this felt like the last summer where things were still simple. Our idea was to camp out by this lake about an hour from town. It wasn't some big well-known lake with cabins and tourists. It was smaller, tucked deep into the woods, and mostly known only by locals. Trails were leading to it, but no official campsites, which was exactly why we thought it was perfect. No parents, no rangers checking in, just us and the water. It was me, my buddy Chris, his girlfriend at the time named Taylor, and my best friend Ryan. We all packed tents, sleeping bags, food, a small cooler with drinks, and some firewood. We weren't planning anything crazy, just a night of swimming, sitting by the fire, maybe telling stories, and crashing in our tents before heading home the next morning. The hike wasn't bad. The sun was still up, and the air was warm but not unbearably hot. The deeper we went into the woods, the quieter it became. No traffic, no people, just the sound of birds and the crunch of our boots. When we finally reached the lake, it was exactly how I remembered it from the one time I'd been there before, glassy water reflecting the trees around it, reeds along the edges, and a tiny rocky shoreline where you could set up a fire. It felt untouched, like a place nobody had been to in weeks. We dropped our stuff and started setting up. Chris and Taylor were bickering while putting their tent together, Ryan was busy finding a flat spot for ours, and I was gathering extra sticks for the fire. Everything felt normal, fun, like just another summer night. But around sunset, something changed. We'd just finished eating, hot dogs over the fire, and were lounging around, waiting for the sky to turn dark so we could swim under the stars. That's when Ryan said something. "Do you hear that?" We all paused. At first, there was nothing. Just the crackle of the fire and a couple of bugs. Then I realized what he meant, it was too quiet. Earlier, there had been frogs, crickets, birds, the kind of white noise you expect near a lake. But now it was dead silent. Chris shrugged it off. "Animals quiet down at night, man." But Ryan shook his head. "Not like that. Not all at once." Taylor told him he was being paranoid, and eventually, we all laughed it off. But the mood had shifted. We didn't swim. Instead, we just sat closer to the fire. That's when I noticed something across the lake. It was faint because the sun was nearly gone and the tree line was dark. But I swear I saw movement. Something was standing near the opposite edge of the water. At first, I thought it was just a tree stump or a shadow. But when I squinted, it looked like a person. Tall. Thin. Just standing there. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't say anything at first because I didn't want to freak anyone out. But then Taylor asked if anyone else felt like we were being watched. And that's when things started to spiral. The fire gave us some comfort, but now and then, I thought I heard movement in the woods. Sticks snapping, leaves crunching, far enough away that it could have been an animal, but close enough that it made your skin crawl. Chris eventually got up and shone his flashlight across the lake. "See? Nothing," he said. But the beam of light only hit the first few feet of trees. Beyond that, it was pitch black. Taylor said she wanted to go home, but Chris told her to relax. Ryan, though, looked uneasy. He pulled me aside when the other two were distracted. "You saw it too, didn't you?" he whispered. I didn't answer at first, but then I nodded. "Yeah. Across the lake." His face went pale. I knew it. I wasn't imagining it. We didn't tell Chris and Taylor, but from that point on, neither of us could shake the feeling that we weren't alone. That was enough. We grabbed our stuff as fast as we could, not even bothering to pack properly. Ryan kept the hatchet ready, Chris held the flashlight, and we started down the trail together, Taylor sobbing the whole way. But the man followed. Every time we looked back, the beam of light would catch glimpses of him, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always there. Walking, never running, but keeping pace with us. The woods felt endless. Every tree looked the same, and the trail seemed narrower than I remembered. At one point, we lost it completely and had to stop, frantically searching for the markers we'd followed on the way in. That's when we heard it again. The whisper. Closer this time. Stay. It was like he was right behind us. We sprinted. Branches whipped at our faces, rocks cut into our ankles, but we didn't stop. After what felt like forever, we finally saw the faint glow of the road through the trees. We stumbled out of the woods, gasping for air, and collapsed near the car. Chris fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before unlocking the doors. We all piled in, slamming the locks down, staring at the tree line. For a few long minutes, nothing happened. Then, just before Chris started the engine, we saw him. Standing at the edge of the woods. Watching us. Still smiling. We tore out of there, gravel flying, none of us daring to look back. The next morning, in the safety of daylight, it almost felt like a bad dream. But when we checked the car, there were muddy handprints on the back window. We never went back to that lake. And to this day, whenever summer ends and the nights grow quiet, I can still hear that voice in my head. Whispering. Stay. Back when I was 19, I worked a summer job as a security guard at a small-town amusement park. It wasn't anything huge, not like Six Flags or Disney, but it was the kind of place families went during the summer for rides, funnel cakes, and cheap fireworks shows on weekends. The park's name was Harborview Amusement, though locals mostly just called it The View. It had been around since the 70s, and by the time I worked there, it was definitely showing its age. Peeling paint, creaky rides, and attractions that looked like they hadn't been updated since before I was born. It was my first real job, and honestly, it wasn't too bad. I worked the late-night security shift, which mostly meant walking the grounds with a flashlight, making sure no kids snuck in after hours, and checking that all the rides and shops were locked. This was at the very end of summer, right before Labor Day weekend. The park was shutting down for the season, which meant fewer and fewer people were coming in each day. By the last week, it was practically a ghost town. That's when the weird stuff started. The first strange thing I noticed was at the funhouse. It was one of those old-school attractions with distorted mirrors, slanted floors, and a spinning tunnel. During the day, it was harmless fun, but at night, it looked sinister. The paint on the outside was faded, the cartoon clowns on the mural had cracks through their faces, and the whole building leaned slightly to one side. On one of my rounds, I noticed the front door was open. Just barely, like someone had nudged it with their foot. I knew I'd locked it earlier, so I went to check it out. I pulled the door shut, tested it, and sure enough, the lock had been undone from the inside. That rattled me, but I figured maybe one of the day shift workers had left it like that by mistake. I locked it again and moved on. The next night, though, it was open again. And that time, when I pulled it closed, I swore I heard faint laughter inside. Not the kind of laughter you hear from a group of people. This was slower, drawn out, almost like it was mocking me. I stood there for a solid minute, listening. My flashlight beam didn't penetrate more than a couple of feet into the doorway, and the inside was pitch black. Finally, I convinced myself I was imagining things and moved on. But that laughter stuck with me. 2 nights later, things escalated. I was finishing my loop around the park when I noticed the Ferris wheel moving. That ride hadn't been touched in days, and I knew for a fact it was powered down. Yet one of the carts was swaying, slowly rising as the whole wheel turned with this agonizing metallic groan. I froze. My flashlight shook in my hand as I aimed it at the ride. That's when I saw it. A figure, hunched over in one of the higher carts. They weren't sitting like a normal person would. They were crouched, almost folded in half, with their head tilted at an angle that didn't look right. I shouted up at them, demanding to know who it was. No response. The wheel kept turning, painfully slow, until the cart disappeared into the shadows at the top. By the time it came back down, it was empty. And the ride stopped on its own. I didn't finish my shift that night. I sat in the security office until sunrise, trying not to think about what I saw. The final straw happened the very last night the park was open. It was around 2:30 in the morning. I was walking down the main midway when suddenly, every light in the park flicked on at once. Neon bulbs buzzing, game booths lighting up, rides glowing like it was the middle of a summer afternoon. But the park was empty. Completely silent. Then, faintly at first, came the sound of carnival music. That old-timey organ music they'd play during the day, only warped, slower, off-key, like it was playing through broken speakers. I spun in circles, scanning with my flashlight, but the shadows between the rides looked alive. I swear I saw shapes moving in the glow of the funhouse, figures darting between the game stalls. At one point, I caught sight of children. Or what looked like children. Standing in the middle of the midway, still as statues, just staring at me. Then, in the blink of an eye, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the park again. And when my eyes adjusted, the midway was empty. The next morning, I came in to grab my last paycheck. I didn't mention what happened, partly because I didn't think anyone would believe me, and partly because I didn't want to relive it. But when I walked past the Ferris wheel in daylight, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. On the dusty platform beneath the loading area, there were footprints. Small, barefoot, and wet, as if someone had just stepped out of water. The wheel creaked above me, one of the carts swaying gently, even though there wasn't a breeze. I quit that day, paycheck or not. And to this day, whenever I hear carnival music, I feel my chest tighten. Because I know what I saw. And I know it's still out there, waiting for the next season to begin. Back in 2019, right before I left for college, I spent the last week of summer at my grandparents' beach house. They owned a small place on a quiet stretch of shoreline, not a touristy spot, not even a neighborhood really. Just a handful of old houses scattered along the coast, most of them abandoned except during summer. It was supposed to be a calm, reflective week before my life changed completely. Days spent reading on the porch, nights listening to waves crash against the sand. But instead, it turned into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. The first few days were normal. I took walks on the beach, collected shells, and swam in the chilly water. There were barely any people around. Sometimes I'd see an older couple walking their dog, or a fisherman early in the morning, but mostly it felt like I had the whole shore to myself. Until one evening, when I noticed him. The sun was just setting, painting the sky pink and orange. I was walking along the waterline when I saw a figure standing in the distance. At first, I thought nothing of it. People watched sunsets all the time. But as I got closer, something about him unsettled me. He was tall, too thin, and completely still. Not looking at the horizon like you'd expect, but facing me. I slowed my pace. He didn't move. The longer I looked, the less human he seemed. His arms hung unnaturally low at his sides, and his head was tilted just slightly, like he was studying me. Goosebumps crawled up my arms, and I turned back toward the house. When I glanced behind me a minute later, he was gone. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe just another beachgoer I hadn't noticed leaving. But the next night, he was there again. In the same spot. Watching. I tried to brush it off, but it became a pattern. Every evening, around the same time, I'd see him. Always in the distance, always facing me. One night, I stayed inside just to avoid it. I made dinner, put on some music, and tried to relax. By midnight, I felt a little better. That was until I heard it. A faint tapping. I muted the TV and listened. It came again, rhythmic, deliberate. I followed the sound to the sliding glass door that faced the beach. The curtains were drawn, but I could see a shape pressed against them. A hand. Flat against the thin fabric, fingers spread wide. I froze, too scared to move, too scared to breathe. After a few seconds, the hand slid downward, slowly, until it vanished at the bottom of the curtain. When I finally found the courage to yank the curtain open, the porch was empty. The beach was silent. But there was a single wet handprint smeared on the glass. I called the cops that night. 2 officers came out, searched the property, and walked the beach with flashlights. They found nothing, no footprints, no signs of forced entry. They told me it was probably a prank. Some local messing with the city kid alone in a summer house. I wanted to believe them. But I couldn't shake the image of that hand sliding down the curtain. The next night, I barricaded the door with a chair and tried to stay awake. Every creak of the house, every crash of the waves made me jump. And then, around 3 in the morning, I heard it again. Not tapping this time. Whispering. Low, muffled, right outside the glass. I didn't check. I didn't move. I sat frozen in the dark until the first hint of daylight broke. When I finally pulled back the curtain, the porch was empty. But the chair I'd used to block the door had been moved. By the end of the week, my parents came to pick me up. I didn't tell them everything, just that the house felt off and I wanted to leave. The morning we packed up, I took one last look around. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. On the inside of the sliding glass door, the same spot where I'd first seen the handprint, there was another one. Clearer this time. Perfectly formed, as if someone had pressed their palm against the glass from inside the house. I never went back to my grandparents' beach place after that. And sometimes, when I'm lying awake at night, I swear I hear waves crashing and faint tapping on the window. Even though I'm miles from the ocean. And that was 3 disturbing true end of summer horror stories. The lake, the amusement park, the beach house, each one left its mark, and each one proves that the end of summer isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's when the shadows linger the longest. Which story scared you the most? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true horror stories every week. Sleep well, if you can.